you so much, and you're all here, and we thought maybe it could be a fun idea. One of Maxine, well, the Maxine mantra, I guess, is I will not accept a life I do not deserve. Do you want to say it with me? If I repeat it, will you repeat after me? You promise?
Yeah.
Okay. I will not accept a life
I do not deserve.
I didn't hear that. Again.
I will not accept a life I do not deserve.
Okay, one more time. I will not accept a life I do not deserve. Thank you so much for coming. I love you all. I really hope you enjoy the movie, and
Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the newest film in the Ti West X Trilogy called Maxine. This is the finale of this series. Of course, this movie stars Mia Goth, Giancarlo Esposito, Kevin Bacon, Moses Sumney, and Elizabeth Debicki, along with a whole bunch of other people that round out the ensemble cast that is Maxine. But of course, this being a Ti West X Trilogy film, this is of course a showcase for the talents of Mia Goth, who is front and center in this film that's doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff, and I cannot wait to talk about this film in full spoiler. So if you have not had a chance to watch Maxine yet in theaters, it is out now. It's very exciting. If you're a fan of the first two, I'm sure you'll find a lot of enjoyment in this film. Although I do think this is the weakest of the trilogy, I still think this is a really good time. So what is this film about? So essentially this is the first official sequel to X, whereas Pearl was the prequel, and it once again follows Maxine Minx, played by Mia Goth, who is trying to break out into mainstream Hollywood stardom. She of course made a name for herself in porn, but she wants more than that, and once she gets finally cast in a horror movie directed by Elizabeth Debicki's character, she thinks she has made it. But of course her past is going to come back to haunt her with all these secrets that she's had, covered up with X, and everything that happened in her past even before that is all coming up to try to bring her down, and she's not going to let that happen because she is Maxine fucking Minx. So first, let's talk about the things that I really loved about this movie, and that of course is the same thing that I've loved about all the other films in this series, which is Ti West's direction and his stylistic flair of how he is really a chameleon as a director, where he can set his movies in a specific time period and he completely nails that era in a way that doesn't feel just like nostalgia bait that you get from other movies that are set in the 80s, for instance. Whereas X was a perfect film, a perfect representation of 1970s horror, especially with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think if anything, X is probably the best remake of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre that we're ever going to see, with it technically not being a remake, but it really does capture the vibe. There's even a joke in this movie about it being the Texas Porn Star Massacre. Love all that stuff, but it really is true. And he did a great job replicating the 1950s Technicolor style of Pearl, and how that film just really does feel like it's set in that era, and it feels completely different stylistically from X. And I think some people prefer that style to it. They prefer those characters and that kind of spiraling of the character of Pearl, and that being such a great character study, whereas this film is very much set in the 80s. It has all the flourishes of the 80s that we've come to love from all these different movies, but again, it doesn't use it as just nostalgia bait. It really does inform the story and has so much style to it that Ti West is able to just bring this era to life in terms of how it references other horror movies from the 80s, how it references different filmmaking styles of the 80s and the campiness of the 80s. Everything about this film really just nails the era that this film is trying to replicate, essentially, and I really loved all of that. But the one thing that I was honestly really surprised about this movie is, if X was a slasher movie and if Pearl was a character study, this movie is very much like a horror noir story. The noir styles of this movie is also very present in this thing, and if anything, it's more of a detective story. It's more of a mystery in terms of how it is a murder mystery, how it is a noir story, more so than it is a slasher. And I'll get into why I think that kind of hindered the movie later on in this review, but I do think that Ti West nailed that style for it. I wasn't expecting that, and I think if I rewatch this movie, expecting it to be more of a noir story, I think I'd enjoy it a bit more, but it taking a totally different turn from what I had, experienced before with X and Pearl was quite jarring at first. But it really is the performances that kept me hooked into this story, especially with Mia Goth and actually Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon is really good in this movie as this sleazy, private investigator that's has all this information. He's hired by somebody who is, the big mystery of this movie. Who is the person that hired this private investigator? Is this person the same killer that is going around killing all these people in Hollywood, whether it's, people related to Mia Goth's character or just other random people, other random women in Hollywood in general. As this Night Stalker character, we will learn who that is as the movie does progress, but Kevin Bacon's character is the proxy for this character, who is, showing her that, they have evidence of what happened in the previous film, what happened in X, how she was the only survivor, how she feels some guilt of being the only survivor, and how she's, trying to make it out into the world and trying to leave all that stuff behind when her past is very important to who she is now. And it's quite interesting to see how Maxine reacts to all these situations that she's handed to her, because of course all the traumatic events that happened in that last film just made her want to be who she wants to be, made her want to, go for her dreams more so than anything else, because life is extremely fragile. And so she has this confidence to her that even Pearl never had when she goes to audition for Elizabeth Debicki's film, and all this stuff, this confidence that she carries as a performer, and this, charisma that she has with Mia Goth playing this character is off the charts. But when her past is being brought back up, especially when she's interacting with Kevin Bacon's character at first, you can tell that this really does shake her, that she really is worried about all this stuff. And of course, there's a lot of commentary on how Hollywood works and how, you'll get your big break, you'll get your chance in Hollywood, but you make one mistake and it'll just, chew you up and spit you out and just forget about you forever. You can't make a single mistake. And when her past is being brought up, she is terrified of this ruining her one chance at, living her dream in the way that Pearl was never able to do. But really, it's all the moments where Maxine's character has that full confidence that I really did love her character, because yes, she's shaken at times in this movie, but of course she has those moments where she's, being threatened in the alley by this random guy with a knife, and she pulls out her gun, makes him strip naked, and literally stomps on his balls in this really just gruesome and just close-up shots that was absolutely just... It was a shot for sure in this movie that I'll most likely not forget for quite some time. But that's the sort of confidence from this character that I really do love, especially when she goes to confront Kevin Bacon and she just beats the shit out of him with these keys in between her fingers. I absolutely love that scene. Probably one of my favorite moments from Maxine. Both those moments are some of my favorite moments of this character in the entire film. I also loved her dynamic with the detectives in this movie, played by Michelle Monaghan and Bobby Cannavale. Of course, Michelle Monaghan being the more good cop type of character, and Bobby Cannavale being the more bad cop type of character, who's definitely trying to be a bad cop. And you can see the dynamic between even those two characters, of them kind of, poking fun at each other throughout this movie, that I thought really did work as well. But there's something about Michelle Monaghan's performance that really did give me the vibe of Frances McDormand in Fargo. Not the accent, but that sweet smile face that she puts on, that demeanor that she has, especially in her first few scenes in this movie, that I really loved. But I think the dynamic between her and Maxine as it grows throughout the entire movie, and how this detective just really wants to help her catch the person who's killing all these people, and how Maxine is so confident in herself that she can handle it on her own and that she doesn't need these police to help her. I really like that dynamic throughout the movie, because you did feel like this being a noir detective story, that those dynamics were all just perfectly set up and perfectly, I guess, portrayed in a way that Ty West is capturing those other noir movies from the 80s. Giancarlo Esposito is also in this movie as Maxine's agent, and this was also one of the funniest parts of this movie. Of course, this X Trilogy having a lot of camp to it, having a lot of comedy along with all the horror elements, and I think that this movie in general had the most camp, or at least I haven't watched the other two films in a minute, but it felt like it had a lot of campy moments. It had a lot of great funny moments, especially when it came to his character being her agent and really just desperately wanting to make her a star, because he's her agent. That's his entire job and purpose as a human being in general, is to make her make it in Hollywood. And when all these secrets start coming up and she goes to him for advice and for help, he is just absolutely ruthless in the way that he's going to help her get away with all the things that she does in this movie. And his hair was just ridiculous. He was extremely over the top and goofy, and I absolutely loved him in this role as well. And of course, his character is there to just bolster Maxine's confidence even more so, because of course that's his job as an agent. He's going to make her look as good as possible when they decide to lure Kevin Bacon's character and get rid of him, because this guy has been causing so many issues. If this guy keeps on, picking at her past and trying to do all these things, it's going to ruin her entire career. And so they lure him to this club in this very hypnotic sequence, and they knock him out, they put him in his car, and they put it in a car demolition thing. And they're not trying to get information out of him. They don't want to know who hired him in the first place. They just want to get rid of him. It does not matter what he says in the situation. This thing is just going to slowly come down and crush him in one of the best gory moments of this entire movie, while Giancarlo Esposito and Maxine just stand there and watch as the horrors happen, and the dogs that they have with them just go over and lick his guts up. It is brutal, and of course, this all being in the guise of, an agent doing anything he can to cover up the bad things in the past of his, his star, essentially, is so funny. And of course, that wasn't the only brutal scene with a bunch of gore. There's a few other scenes in this movie that have the same thing, although I think this movie probably has the least amount of the X trilogy, which was also another thing that really threw me off. Like I said, those other movies were like a slasher, was a character story mixed with a slasher. This one is more of a detective noir story, and so really there's only a few sequences of gore. Of course, there's the balls being stomped on, there's Kevin Bacon's character being smashed to death, there's a couple of kills from the Night Stalker, including, you know, Moses Sumney's character, who I also really like Moses Sumney in this movie. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything before, but he was instantly likable as this friend of Maxine's that was just always there for her. He didn't ask questions, he didn't pry for answers or question any of her, you know, decisions that she makes throughout this entire movie. He was just there to be a supportive friend, and it was honestly really sad to see him go because I was rooting for him to survive through this. But of course, this killer is killing everybody that comes in contact with Maxine's character, and so he of course had to go, and it was going to be the most impactful death for Maxine as a character. And his entire kill sequence was easily the most brutal of, you know, the slasher moments in this film, with his neck being slashed from the back, not from the front, from the back of his neck was brutal. And that entire thing was just, it was honestly, it was kind of cruel, it was kind of mean, but at the same time it was really effective. And when I say there are some elements in this movie that made it my least favorite of the trilogy, I do think the lack of it being a slasher movie was definitely the main element of that. And like I said, it did nail the detective noir story, but I was expecting yet another slasher film, and to not get that and to have those slasher moments be just so few and far between was definitely a disappointing aspect of this movie. And I think on rewatch, you know, knowing what I'm getting into, I think it could improve, and I can just focus more so on the style that they're going for and on the story at hand. But I think as it is, it was honestly a little bit disappointing to see a lack of the brutal kills that those other movies really did have and really did shine with, and the campiness that are in those kills, because yes, there is still camp in this movie, but I think it is in some of the other sequences that don't really have as much flourish and as much style because it lacks the kill sequences. I guess there's two of them that come to mind. Of course, one being the chase sequence through the studio lot on Universal, which if you've been on the Universal Studio Tour, you know, in Los Angeles, you know that all these locations that they go to is exactly as it is when you do the Hollywood Studio Tour, which I absolutely love. I've been to all these places. The Psycho House was great to see them, you know, reference that several times throughout this entire movie, which it was great to see. But at the same time, I think that chase sequence, especially certain shots of it where it kind of, you know, follows Maxine as she's running, then it pans over, and then it follows, you know, Kevin Bacon's character as he's chasing her. It didn't have the energy that I think the other movies had, especially it didn't build up to a kill. It just built up to her hiding in the Psycho House and him being caught by a police officer, and it just ending that sequence there. It just felt a little goofy getting to that point, and it didn't really go anywhere besides just having a fun chase sequence to have in the middle of the movie. But again, it didn't have that impact, that punch that the other movies had, with those being strictly a slasher movie. And because we were strictly following Maxine's character, we didn't really get to follow, you know, Moses Sumney's character all too much to see that slasher sequence, that kill sequence really build up besides just the couple scenes that he was in. I can say the same thing about Halsey's character and even Lily Collins' character, who, you know, both of these characters have, you know, impactful moments where they're talking to Maxine, they have some sort of, you know, thing that they say that leads to how they, you know, figure everything out by the end of the movie, and they all have certain moments that work, more so with Lily Collins than Halsey's character. But those characters are just kind of there, and they're there just to die, to be another victim of this slasher killer, and it doesn't, their roles don't have as much of an impact as, say, like a Jenna Ortega or a David Cornsweet in both X and Pearl. And so I just didn't really feel for their characters all too much, besides the fact that they popped up a few times and they were there for their kill sequences, but the entire time we're just, you know, focusing on Maxine's character the entire time, and all these other characters are just a means to an end. That also kind of disappointed me as well. But the whole thing with Lily Collins' character being the whole, you know, star of the movie that they're making, and they're making the sequel to it, and her scream was immortalized, and how it kind of poked fun at the credit sequence of Pearl with, you know, the credits with the blue text going over her face as she's smiling. In this film, it's Lily Collins' face screaming as the credits go over, you know, and they scroll up with her in the background throughout the entirety of the credit sequence. I love that they're poking fun at themselves for that. It's very meta, and, you know, she has great moments in there, but again, her character didn't really have too much impact on the story besides just being a means to an end. And I think the other sequence that really fell flat for me was, sadly, the ending. It was to a point where I think when we got to the climax of this film, I was just saying to myself in my head, I was just saying, I really hope this isn't the climax. Like, I really, really hope this is not the climax, because if it is, that's honestly really disappointing. And it was the climax of this movie. It just was a giant shootout between, you know, the two cop characters, all these different cult people all surrounding the villain of the movie, who was, of course, you know, Maxine's dad, who was teased in X as this preacher who's preaching all this, you know, religious text and saying that, you know, Maxine's character was, you know, taken by the devil and he needs to, you know, wish the devil out of her. And there's this whole subplot of this movie that is very much focused on the satanic panic in the 80s, which I loved the tone and feel of that stuff. I do think that all of that stuff did work building up until this climax. It gave me the feel of, if you've seen the movie Censor that premiered at Sundance several years ago, I love Censor. I think that movie absolutely nails the tone of the satanic panic, the video nasties, all that stuff is mentioned in this movie. Whereas if you want a film that fully focuses on just that and absolutely nails it, go watch Censor. I love that movie. I think it also has the themes that this movie tried to have, whereas this movie was a little bit cluttered with themes. It did also have the idea that, you know, the media that we watch causes people to be violent, and there's that idea where, you know, video games make people violent, or, you know, horror movies make people violent. We need to censor that stuff, which is complete BS, but at the same time, that's what Hollywood thought at the time. But of course, once all that stuff culminates and we get to see that it is the dad, this, you know, cult that is formed that are trying to, you know, take out all these people because they are sinners, and he wants to try to exorcise the demons out of all these people, and he's making his own film to be a representation of what he believes in that is going against the grain of what Hollywood does, making all these, you know, sinful horror movies and all this stuff that is kind of, you know, expressing the theme of what the 80s were with the satanic panic. All that stuff is all great and all, but I think the worst part about this ending, which just had me feeling like, oh god, I really hope this isn't the climax of the movie, because Maxine was tied up the entire time. She was no longer an active protagonist where, you know, she punched Kevin Bacon in the face with her keys in a very brutal sequence. She smashed him in his own car. That was absolutely brutal. She stomped on a guy's balls, but now we get to the ending of the film and she confronts her dad and she freezes and he knocks her out and ties her up, and she's no longer an active protagonist throughout the climax of this movie, and it's the cop characters who have the satisfaction of shooting all these other people. And I was really hoping that she would be the one to take out each of these cult members in a very brutal and slasher-like way, because like I think the quote at the beginning of the movie is, in order to become famous, essentially you have to become a monster first and become infamous out of that. And I thought that was going to be kind of the idea and the theme of this movie. She even, when she's cast in her movie, Elizabeth Debicki's character says that her character is a killer, but she's not a bad guy. She's not the villain of the story. She has her own prerogative in her own, I guess, story that she needs to get out of herself, and that kind of motivates her to do all the things that she does in this movie, but she doesn't really earn that by the end of it, which I thought was extremely disappointing. And yeah, the two cop characters get taken out by the end of the film, where Bobby Cannavale's character gets shot and he dies in Maxine's arms, and he has a really funny line where he wanted to be an actor and he touches a Hollywood sign right before he dies. What a crushed and just broken and shattered dream that was. And then, you know, Michelle Monaghan's character kind of falls over and rolls down the hill, and, you know, she finally confronts her dad, has this shotgun, points it at his face, and the police helicopter flies overhead and says to put the gun down, that you're under arrest, like you got to surrender here at this point. And you get this entire sequence, this entire, I guess, montage of her in the future, her starring in this role, becoming famous, going on the red carpet and having all these people chant her name and do all these things, and she made it. She accomplished her dreams before it, you know, smash cuts back to her in that moment holding the gun over it. And again, it's that moniker of, I will not accept a life that I do not deserve. And if she lets this guy go, she isn't, you know, doing the thing that she wants to do to be able to do what she truly wants, because that isn't her. She won't deserve it if she doesn't take this guy out. And so yeah, by the very end, she shoots her dad in the face. His head explodes in a beautiful, just gory, disastrous mess that I absolutely did love. And yeah, she still got away with it. She still starred in her movie. And yes, you know, Lily Collins' character is no longer the star. She's now the star. They have a moment of silence, which I thought was really funny at the ending of this film. But nothing else really changed besides, you know, she just made that active decision, and she didn't get arrested for it. She didn't lose her dreams. She still got her dreams. And so that entire, I guess, montage thing, it still did work for me. I'm glad they smashed back and had her shoot him in the face instead of just arresting the guy. I'm glad they did that, but at the same time, it didn't really change anything after that. And so yeah, I think the ending of this movie, along with a couple other moments throughout this movie that I felt just wasn't as, you know, entertaining as the slasher style of the previous two films. That detective noir story was really well done by Ty West, but I do think that it affected this character's journey by the end of it, sadly, in a climax that I just thought was quite underwhelming. And again, I do think if I watch this movie again with the expectations set that this movie is not a slasher movie, this is a detective noir story with some gory kills in it that are just few and far between, maybe I'll enjoy the journey of this film. But as it stands right now, I was a little bit disappointed in the ending of the film, although I did really enjoy the journey just to get there. It just really was that ending. It just was that climax that really did bum me out about this film. Everything else I did absolutely love. So those are going to be my thoughts on Maxine. I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Were you disappointed fun in this movie. I think that the scores on Rotten Tomatoes for this one is a bit lower than the other two films, unfortunately, but I do think that the audiences, for the most part, are going to enjoy this movie. I don't think people are going to walk out of this thing as disappointed as, say, I was with just the ending of the film, because like I said, I think everything else going up to that point was really solid. I do think the themes of Hollywood and, exploitation and all that stuff is still very strong in all three of these movies, and I think if you watch this as a trilogy, it's still a damn good horror trilogy. One of the best horror trilogies, honestly, out there, with a conclusion that was mostly satisfying. I think it's satisfying for a character standpoint, but a little bit, underwhelming from a slasher movie standpoint, and the action, I guess, or the horror sequences of the trilogy, I think, was the weakest of the three. But either way, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this film. Were you disappointed? Did you really love it? Was it a satisfying conclusion to you? Let me know in the comment section down below all your thoughts. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I'm of course doing weekly reviews for the Acolyte, and we have 2 more episodes left to go, so I'm very excited to wrap that series up. I've been having a lot of fun watching that, and of course Longlegs releases next week, which I am extremely excited for that movie. I've been waiting for a very long time to see that film, and it just looks so great, and I've heard great things about it. So I will be, of course, talking about Longlegs next week. So like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I hope to see you all in my next one.